And here she is.
Perfect. Okay, I haven't got the agenda on my screen at the moment, so on my other screen, so I'll read it from here. Actually, I can't get it. Right. So welcome to the February 28th, 2022 GBOS special meeting. Girdwood Board of Supervisors committees and subcommittees are subject to the Alaska Open Meetings Act as found in Alaska Statute 44.62.310 and Alaska Municipal Code 1.25 public meetings. Girdwood Board of Supervisors operates under the Girdwood Public Meeting Standards of Conduct. Call to order at 7:03 and we'll do the roll call. So Mike Edgington, I am co-chair and land use supervisor. Brianna?
Brianna Sullivan, Parks and Recreation, Cemetery Supervisor, co-chair.
And Amanda?
Amanda Sassy, the Roads and Utilities Supervisor.
And Jennifer?
Jennifer Wingard, Public Safety Supervisor.
You're a Guy.
Guy Wade, Fire Department.
Okay. Does anybody have any disclosures? I'm not hearing any. So agenda revisions and approval. Do I hear a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
This is Brianna. I move to approve tonight's agenda.
Thank you. And second?
Second.
Okay, we'll do this by assent. Anyone opposed doing this by assent? I'm not hearing anything, so we'll consider that passed. Quick announcements. Public is encouraged to ask questions and provide comment. Please raise your hand virtually and wait for acknowledgement. To help discussions stay productive, please direct your comments to the board rather than the members of the public and keep your comments focused on the business under discussion. Please be respectful of everyone's opinions. HLB Draft 2022 Annual Work Programme, the 5-year management plan, is available online and there is a link there to the page. Let's jump straight into the agenda. 2021 budget review. So we'll go through, we'll start with fire, I think.
I believe
Actually,
so.
I'll hand it over to you, Kyle, and you can start with whichever one you like.
Okay, yeah, we'll start with, let's see who I got here, fire first. So I'm going to start with an overview summary. Oh, Guy's got his hand up.
I know it sounds like you're about to do it. This is the first one of these I've been through. Can you kind of give us a rundown on the objective and what we're trying to accomplish tonight?
Sure. So every year I do a review with the Board of Supervisors on our expenses for 21. And then we also talk about any projects or things like that. We do, within the packet, provide a summary from Parks and also from streets of projects and things that we accomplished in 21. It just helps to give the board, well, our hope is it gives the board better knowledge about how tax dollars are spent, how they ended up at year end, and the things that we had to deal with in the last fiscal year. So with that, I'll sort of jump into it. In 21, we had 4 different services that we taxed for. Those being fire department, public works, which is street maintenance, police department, and parks and rec. In years past, we also have had cemetery, but we haven't funded cemetery for the last couple of years as we've completed the initial feasibility study and now really hoping for larger funding to go for the construction. But with that, what you have here on the screen in front of you is just sort of an overview of the budgets and how they worked out this year. We started with a budget at $3.4 million, a little bit more than that. And we increased the budget by $418,000. And what that increase is there, you'll see where it says budget change. That is money that we took out of the undesignated savings account to pay for the Halloween weekend damages. That money did not stay in the operating capital. It went operating funds. It went straight to capital, and we paid all those bills out of capital. And the reason we did that was to avoid making our operating budget look bigger for last year because that affects what we have to put away for our designated savings, which I'll touch on here later, because it sort of screws up the ratio. And all that work that we did was all capital anyway, so we put it into the capital account and paid it out of there. So what it does is it moves through here. It comes out of undesignated, goes into the operating, and then gets contributed to our capital. So that's why it appears here. Our actuals for last year were 2.7 million. And I'm going to get into that as we go through it. And we had about 146,000 in change left over surplus for the year. And like I said, we'll go through it.
I think there's a mistake there. You're missing $1 million in the fire department. It's coming out at 117 rather than 1,117.
Oh, it is. Yes, that's right.
So it should be 3.7.
It should be 3.7. Yes, actually, when you said that, yep, that's right. So I missed that on the calculation. And we may find a little bit of mistakes as we go. I use SAP, or the city uses SAP for their accounting, and it's very difficult to pull things out into an Excel file. So sometimes when I create a special document, it'll come up like this. So
I'm assuming that's just a typo and the one got dropped somehow.
yes, it is. So it is a typo, and you'll see it as we go through it here. So I'm going to jump into fire here. So with fire, we'll talk about the non-labor at first. So we don't have a labor budget in fire because the fire department is a nonprofit and they are their own entity that are contracted to work for both the service area and for Anchorage, providing EMS services area-wide. And so they have a contract, and so we pay them contractually yearly. And so down here you can see the contractual price down here with the line that's it says Contractual Services Other. So their annual payment, or their total payment for the year, is $793,000. And so that was all paid out to them and taken care of. But we do have some other expenses that do fall within here. So we start the year with a repair and maintenance supplies, and so we have a $30,000 budget for that. And so out of that, if they buy new tires for a truck, or they have a broken fire apparatus equipment of some sort, it gets pulled from that fund. And then you can see what they do in accounting. They use a bunch of different areas to split all the expenses up. So, like freight expresses, computer subscriptions for them. They have computers on site there, other things. It just sort of gets assigned to an accounting code in that aspect. And then one of the big things we had to purchase this year was a new copier. Their copier basically, it's sort of a joint copier. They purchased a copier, and then our department purchased the service contract and the toners, which sort of equaled out between the two of us. But the actual printer copier over there went out, so that was a bigger purchase for office expense over there. So you'll see that down here in the $8,800 or the $8,900 there related to that. So overall, they're non-labor. They basically spent 99% of it. They had $7,100 or $7,200 left over there in the non-labor in that aspect. With the capital, since the copier was considered a capital purchase, it was withdrawn from their contribution they made this year to capital. And so 65,000 was moved to capital. As you see here, transfers to other funds. So that's the contribution that's made to their capital that helps them save up to buy a new apparatus or command unit, things like that. We've been in discussions with them for several years, and GBOS has approved several purchases out of that fund. So this year they contributed 65,000 to that savings account for that in that aspect. And so overall direct costs here for the service area or for the fire, once again they spent $898,000 there, and they had a surplus of $7,200 from the fire budget there. So it's actually pretty good for fire to have a surplus. A lot of times they didn't have a lot of mechanical failures last year, so sometimes that's an issue that we have to deal with, is if they have an apparatus that breaks down and needs a lot of rebuilding and they can't fund it out of their IGCs, which I'm going to talk about next, that repair and maintenance supply also gets hit pretty hard. So overall, I think it was a good year for the fire department. We didn't have any fourth quarter concerns about funding them and them being budgeted for the full year as we've had in years past. Down here, this is where we get into IGCs. And now IGCs, that term means intergovernment charges. So this is what other departments charge. An example here, the fire department to support them. And so the IGCs are established by those departments and then approved by the assembly at both the first approval of the budget, which is in December, and then once again at the first quarter revisions, which is usually in April after the general election. And so as you can see here, overall, their total IGCs for last year were $267,000, and they spent $258,000 of it. So the other departments charged up to $258,000 in expenses to support Girdwood Fire, which was only 96% of their budget, 97% of their budget there. So overall, when you look at that, their functional costs, they basically spent 98% of their budget. They had a surplus of $15,000, almost $500 there, and it worked out pretty good. So that they had a very good year of operating and staying within budget. And then down below, this is what's interesting, and this is what kind of helps to backfill and cover when we have expenses that may go over budget and it affects the operating budget, is the revenues. So these are revenues that the fire department took in last year, and we estimated that they're going to create $20,000 in revenue. So when we presented the budget, we estimated that the budget would probably bring in about $20,000, and so that reduced the amount we need to ask taxpayers for. And so it took it down from $1,164,000 down to $1,144,000. And so they produced more revenue than expected. They produced $8,300 in fire service fees, which probably came from Kenai Peninsula responses. And then they had other miscellaneous fees. I think this $3,000 was a one-time payment for something. I don't remember what that was. Chief Weston probably would know. But overall, they brought in $31,300 in revenue, which was a surplus of $11,300. So that worked out really well last year for revenues coming in for the department. And so with that, adding that to the surplus they had in their operating, that gave them a total of $26,742.72. So overall, a good year for the fire department, and that surplus of $26,000 will now go into our undesignated fund, and also will now help to backfill our emergency fund that we use for the Halloween repairs. So I'll open up the questions. There's a lot of talking.
Guy, go ahead.
Yeah, just that the remaining there, the fire department, they don't hold on to that. That goes right back into our capital funds or undesignated funds for. It goes
into the service area's undesignated fund. And in this case, since we have a hole right now in our emergency fund, that money is going to go into the service area, Girdwood service area emergency fund, to help replenish it.
So Brianna, and then sorry.
Okay, Kyle, on that number, thank you. The 26,742. You just said that it goes in there, but do we need to make any motions that it goes there, or does that happen later?
No, by code, it drops into our, and this is what I'll show you right here, is our fund balance. And so it goes into our fund balance. And since we are short $120,000 in our emergency repair fund, it's going to backfill into that automatically. So by code, those accounts need to be maintained at the levels that they're set at. And so right now we're $120,000 short in that emergency account because we spent that on the Halloween. So that's where it's going to go.
Okay, thank you.
So if we go back to the comment, so if we go back to the fire department budget, the way to think about this is there's there's a certain amount of money that goes straight to the nonprofit, and then a lot of the extras we're paying for. So all the IGCs we pay for, etc. So the fire department got paid in non-labor what they were expecting to be paid, which is what, 793,000. So they got paid their full contract amount. And then the other stuff is the overheads that we cover for things we own, but in some cases for equipment we own, the service area owns, in other cases for the IGCs, and that's effectively where the surplus came in. And then I'm also unclear as to why any excess revenue comes back to the service area rather than to the fire department. I'm not entirely clear about that, but we'll take it.
Yeah, well,
I suppose actually if they undershoot their revenue, we make it up.
Correct. And so there's the established line there. There are things that the nonprofit bills separately for, but when they're providing a service that is basically supported and funded by the taxpayers, then that money does come back to the service area.
Yeah. So, for example, the service outside the service area comes back in, and equipment rental, which is effectively what's happening when we if there's money coming from if we're lending equipment to other departments, the Department of Forestry or something like that, that's our equipment, so we should be receiving that income.
Correct. So the only thing that the nonprofit has is labor. And so like when Chief Weston goes on fire deployments, which last year she went on 3 of them, that money comes back to the nonprofit. It doesn't come back to the service because she's leaving nonprofit to go fulfill this role, which then puts the nonprofit in a short. So
that makes sense. Yeah. So if you think about it, we have a bunch of assets which the fire department uses. When those assets are making money, the money comes back to us.
Correct. So you're saying they go up the Turnagain Pass, they're using our equipment to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Jennifer or Guy? Jennifer first, and then I think Guy, you still have your hand up, and I'm not sure if that's from before.
I think Guy raised his hand first. He can go first.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, do you have, like, the last 5 years, is this balance unusual? Or they come in pretty close to what their budget is every year?
Well, they come in pretty close to what their budget is. We've had some year, and what has happened is that we've never gone over budget with the fire department, but we've had some fourth quarters where the fire chief has come and says, I don't have enough money to finish the year. And so what the board has done is that they've taken money from the capital contribution, that money that goes to the capital savings account, and they've taken money out of there to help the fire department finish the year. So that has always been a thing that's been there to help cover that. So for the most part, no, we've never gone over budget there.
Thank you.
And there have been some cash flow issues as well, where for example, the repayments in the income weren't going to be available till January, February, but they still had to meet December or January payroll.
Correct. As we were getting these agreements up, especially when we started doing the Kenai Peninsula and some with Whittier, yes, we didn't get to see payments until the next fiscal year.
Jennifer.
I don't know, this is maybe a kind of an arcane question, but the money that we put in towards the Halloween expenses, that doesn't get in the way of potential reimbursements. And also if we do get the full reimbursements that we might be hoping for some of those expenses, does that just turn into then a surplus in the emergency fund?
What will happen is that we'll have to make answer the reimbursements. If we do get reimbursements, it will most likely come in the form of a check, and then at that point we make a determination as to where we want that money to go. Most likely, if the hole in the emergency fund is backfilled by the surplus from our operating budgets this year, then I'll probably seek GBOS's clarity on, do we just want to put it into our undesignated account, or do we just want to set it into our capital account and then have it there? Because if you have it in your capital account, then it's much easier to use it Whereas if it sits in your undesignated fund, the fund balance, then it takes assembly action to move it. And then if you want to use it again, it needs another assembly action to do it. Where if it's sitting in capital, it only takes one assembly action. So yes, it's a bit of a roadmap as to where the money is going to end up. If no more questions, I can move on to the next one. Like,
Yeah, let's move through.
Okay.
Thanks, Kyle.
And I'll bounce to the back and forth on this here and talk about the fund balance, but that, I'll get to it at the end as a refresher. We did talk about it recently, so well, let's move into Girdwood Parks and Rec, and we'll go through this. These are budgets that Margaret and I have better control over. Whereas the fire department, you know, we have a minor aspect there, but we do try to influence it so it does end up in the positive each year. But these two budgets are more within our control. So, you know, first we'll talk about is our labor. So we have two seasonals that worked for us, this year, we decided to keep the seasonals on longer as they were very good workers and they were getting quite a bit done for us. And so we calculated that in with our non-labor side to make sure that we could afford them as we were going forward. And the expenses also changed a little bit compared to what we thought the estimated budget was going to be. So in the end, we ended up spending $12,000 more with our labor last year for Brian and Andrew, but they both worked out great and they did a ton of work for us. So we were really pleased with them. So overall, you can see the different expenses that we have from them, just straight labor time. They do get some annual time off. We do pay their Medicare and taxes, and they have a small unemployment insurances they pay as well. Getting into our operating, so one of our largest operating supplies is it's just buying materials, nails, screws, wood, different repair items that we need, new garbage cans, things like that. So when we give you the budget, I try to break those all out, but then they end up in a large sum here under operating supplies, and so that gets pulled out there. We do some brief office supplies, but most of our office supplies come out of our road budget. And then we have some publications, like we put an ad in the milepost, and then we have subscriptions. We joined the chamber here, which advertises the campground, and a few other things. And then you can see our fuel expenses. And most of the fuel is for our mechanical equipment and then also for our snow machines. So that last year, we had machines broke down quite a bit, so we didn't use as much fuel. So it was a bit of a surplus there with fuel in that aspect. And then we have rentals that we usually do. This kind of gets moved around, so we have a rental line, and then I'll give my receipts to the county department, and they'll put it into different areas, as you can see down here. So it just sort of, it looks like a lot of money left over, but we use it for sure in different ways. And then repair and supply maintenance. So we have a term contract with our lawnmower. And so you can see his expenses for the year. It was supposed to be 66,000, ended up being 61. But it also kind of got split up. I think they sort of did the different billing here with ground maintenance. But we also had Josh Meister with Alaska Arborists do a lot of lawn maintenance for us last year with seeding and trying to improve the turf at both the baseball field and the soccer field. This is the third year, and we've seen real success with him and what he's doing there in that aspect. And then we had some miscellaneous permits that we needed to get for different projects with Parks and Rec. So you have expenses there along those lines. Every year we have $500 for support of volunteers. Due to COVID, we've been pretty holding back on that. I think this year we'll be able to do it, but a lot of times that's like buying gloves or tools or different things to support our volunteers as they come in and work for us. You can see one of our largest line items is our donations to nonprofits. So the GBOS grants they're given out. So you can see $60,000 there expended for nonprofit grants. So that's one of the largest items. line items in the budget. And then we didn't do advertising. And I think we might have changed that for 22 because that used to be the fund that went to Turnagain Times and then the Glacier Gazette. But since then, there's been no paper. And so so we didn't have an advertising budget for last year in that aspect. But we did have some printing and binding, and then we have computer subscriptions. Those come and go. They're not very predictable. And then we did have some rentals in that aspect. And so we had fleet rentals, we had heavy or equipment rentals, different sort of aspects. So you can see up here, we had rental budget up here, and then we had some more rentals. And a lot of that had to do also with our rent-a-cans. And so our outhouses, and we added more outhouses than we did years past. So we saw some more money in that aspect. And then our fleet rental for our trucks there. So we had 2 trucks last year. We had 3 trucks, but 2 of them were charged to Parks and Rec. Then the third one was charged to the roads. That's my truck. And so we had a specialized flatbed, which was really handy for tools and things like that. And then we had a smaller truck. And the reason we had 2 trucks was just because of COVID. We were trying to limit exposure between everybody and allowed for people to have their different pieces of equipment for doing gardening and things like that. And then contractual services. So we used part of the funding from contractual services to cover the overrun for our staff. And so, but we did have an SA crew that came through. And so we had expenses with them in that area. So you can see there the difference there with the budgets. And then public utilities. So our utilities were pretty close to what we predicted, just $900 over. But that's for like the Glacier City Hall over there, waste disposal, different things, gas, electricity, lights. So all that adds in there. And then insurance, in years past, we've paid for volunteer insurance, but last year we weren't charged for it. So it's pretty much under the umbrella of the city there, but they do get a special policy for volunteers. But there was no charge to our department last year for it. So overall, in the non-labor, we spent $159,000. And then in the transfer to capital, I held back I transferred $135,000. I was concerned about what was going to happen with the Halloween storm as to what the funding was going to be. So I held on to $15,000. But by the time I could try to transfer the rest of that remaining money over, we were out of date. We couldn't do it. And so that $15,000 now is going to fall into the emergency fund to replenish it. So overall, we did transfer 90% of our contributions, $135,000 to Parks and Rec for 21 into that savings account. So overall, we spent $328,000 of the operating budget, which was $342,000. So we spent 95% of that. And then you can see our IGCs for Parks and Rec down here below, what we're charged from other departments to support our operations. And there we spent a little bit more. They charged us a little bit more than we were budgeted for by $1,800, $1,900 there. So we were a little over budget for that. And then, but overall, we were just about $12,000 over our under budget for our Parks and Rec for 21. And then you can see our revenues here. So our revenues are really hit hard in 20 with the pandemic. You know, we had no real rentals. We didn't run the community room. And then 21, we started bringing that stuff back. So we were modest about what our revenues are going to be. We only thought we would really produce about a total of $1,000. But in all, we produced $3,400 there. So, or excuse me, $4,400, and we had a revenue surplus of $3,400. So our camping fees picked up, which is actually last year was pretty popular with the camping. And we had great hosts over there, and they kept that area running really well. And then our rentals here of the community room or excuse me, of the pavilions and things like that also picked up. So that was a $1,500 increase there. We were pleased to see that sort of bounce back. We don't really produce a lot of revenue for Parks and Rec because our fees are like $10 a night for camping, $10 an hour for the community room. The pavilions are very reasonable. The fees are very reasonable for Parks and Rec, so it isn't a huge money maker as to what goes on out there. So with the additional revenues and everything there, we had a surplus of $16,000 for Parks and Rec in 21. Open to questions.
So is the right way to think about this that we if you put everything together, what basically at that 16,000 is really primarily not transferring money to capital? It's 15,000, that is not transferring money to capital. So we effectively broke even if we'd followed that path.
Correct.
Yep.
Yep. We would have been very close.
Yep. Sorry, Brianna, I jumped in front of you. I should let you go
That's
first.
fine.
Next time.
Thanks. Thanks, Kyle. I was curious, what is environmental services?
Let's see.
The bottom of page, the first page.
What was that 5,004? I need to look that up.
This is 4999. So I thought, oh, that's
Yeah,
curious.
that was a contract that we must have had for something. I have to look that one up. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
Is that invasive species?
It is. Yep.
Oh,
It's for our invasive species or invasive spraying and weed pulling.
yeah, I remember that. Actually, that invoice now. Okay.
Yep, alien species was the name of the contractor.
Does he do that every year?
He does. Yeah, as long as I've been here, we've funded that in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service. The U.S. Forest Service does a large chunk. Now the DOT does it, and hopefully he gets the railroad on board as well.
Right. I do remember him at all the meetings.
He'll be
annually.
back. He'll be doing the same presentation again, probably in the next month or two.
And I think Alyeska has done it some years as well.
It last year was, yeah, they started getting the hawkweed on, especially up on Tanaka.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
See no more questions. Let's move on.
Okay. Let's look at police budget. Oh, Jennifer.
Sorry, Jen.
Sorry, just quick question. Sorry. Just out of curiosity, can you tell me who sets the fees for the revenues that you're talking about, like for the camping and the community room and all that?
Your board of supervisors does.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
And we have not, honestly, I haven't changed them in almost 10 years. It's been pretty set. And so if the board of supervisors wanted to take a review of that, we could. So.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that because it struck me that the room rate seemed really low, but that's a conversation for another time. Thanks.
Okay, so police, let's move into that. Pretty straightforward budget here. So we have a contractual amount, and last year our contractual amount was $675,000. It was the same amount the year before because the consumer price index went down in between the 2 years, so we stayed at the same contracted amount as called out in the contract. As we know, next year the contract will be going up because of inflation, and so we will see an increase with that as well. But for this year, it was 675, or for the 21 it was, and what happens sometimes, and it shows there's like a $2,500 difference. What happens sometimes is that the accountants in town throw expenses sometimes into that column, and then I try to catch it and clear it up, but in the end it all kind of works itself out. And I think that expense there either had to do with a rental fee, or had to do for the substation, or had to do with hauling cars away, abandoned cars, or different expenses that we do. So that takes us down to rentals there. As you can see, the rentals kind of get lumped around, but we had $6,000 in rental fees for 21, which pays for our substation, or for the substation for them to use over there at the ACS building. And then we had a contractual services other. And so this is basically funds we have set aside to pay for abandoned cars, towing, like the New Year's Eve, where we set them up here at the Alyeska Hotel so they can respond all night for towing cars for the police. Also for signage, we buy any special signage or other sort of public safety features for that. That's where it goes. So overall, our expenses were down. We're not very much for last year. Actually, towing wasn't as much of an issue. I've towed more cars so far in 22 than I did in 21. I think just because people were more compliant, and as soon as we tagged it, they got out of town square, different things like that. Whereas this year, we've been finding people dumping cars more often, and then they're getting towed, and we're paying for those removal services to make it happen. So overall, once again, non-labor, we spent about 99% of the budget. We had a little excess there of $6,600, $6,700, and that's just because we didn't use as much in our miscellaneous account. And then we do get charged a few IGCs, mostly there for purchasing services and the accountants. And so in the end, we had a small surplus of $6,700 there for the police budget. I'll open up for questions.
I was going to make one comment about, I remember in previous years, we used to quite often see the rental appear under public utility because the rental is listed as like ACS. So yeah. Somebody somewhere says, oh, that must be a telephone bill, and puts it under a different category because we're renting obviously in the ACS building. So right. Quite often the rentals doesn't appear in the right column.
The rentals come on the same bill as the ACS bill. And so it actually took some time to figure what was happening there because they thought they were paying for the phone, but we're paying for building space. So
yeah. Guy.
Yeah, my question was on the rentals. How come there's no charge there for rentals last year? Is that correct?
Yeah, because they dropped it down into so what happens is there's different accountants and they'll see that, and like they did here, they dropped it into the public utilities because it comes on a bill that looks just like an ACS bill. And so it gets confusing, but on our side, we know where it goes. And then like I said, up above, they also dropped it into the other professional services. So that rental expense kind of got pushed around in the different accounting codes.
And what exactly is that? It's just that building by Chair 5? Correct.
So in that building, when we first started the police contract, they had a room upstairs that they no longer used. It used to be a big switch room. And then as technology got better, they needed less space. And so they have an empty upstairs. And then when we approached them, we actually started an agreement with them that had some capital changes in there. They put in a bathroom and they did a bunch of work in the upstairs to make it more accommodating for the officers, especially officers who may stay overnight. And so we paid that off over the first 10 years. So originally our rental was $12,000 a year. We paid that off in 3 years, the improvements that we made in there. And so now it's $6,000 a year. So yeah, it gives them a full-time station here, which is really handy because on the weekends, the officers are mostly there 24 hours.
Thank you.
All right. Another question?
Okay, no more questions. I don't see any other questions, so we'll move on to Public Works.
Public Works.
Roads.
Or roads. Well, I'm under the Public Works Department, so I give it the Public Works name. But so this is where you'll find the expenses for Margaret and I. This is the direct labor for year-round staff. So our operating budget last year was $265,000 for the two of us. And we expended $266,000 there, $267,000 between the two of us. And so you can see our straight time and our different benefits that we get, accrual leave, retirement, life insurance, medical, dental, and unemployment insurance, the different taxes, and the long-term disabilities that go with being a muni employee. So overall, we were pretty close on budget there. There's always some unknown factors in there. I'm sure that play into it. But we came in almost close to budget on that one. Moving into the non-operating side, we have operating supplies. And a lot of times these are things that we don't expect or we have come up. So they get pulled from other areas here because we also have repair and maintenance supplies. So they might end up here or down below. With operating supplies, we had about $4,300 in operating supplies. That's anything from cones to tripods to maybe survey equipment, things along those lines. Cans of paint to find the utilities, all that stuff. So, and then here's our office supplies. So these are the things from paper and pens to printer, ink for our office here. For the most part, we don't really need a lot, but things, if anything, it's the printer ink that kills us when we have to buy that. But in the last couple of years, we haven't had to do a lot of printing because we've been meeting online tonight. And then fuel. So this is fuel for my truck. Fuel expenses there. So 2,800. We're always careful. We never know what the fuel prices are going to be like. So we're a little bit on the high side there. But we spent $1,900 of that in that aspect. And then gasoline issues. Sometimes they just code it, and then that's probably the same as fuel. It just ends up with a different code there. And then repair and maintenance supplies. So last year, what we did is we had our contractor buy our calcium chloride. So that's our dust suppression calcium that we put out in the spring to help keep the dust down. And so that expense actually ended up down in our contractor line item. And so it didn't show up there. But one thing I'll have to find it in here is that we did buy sand last year for this season. And we bought, I think, about $33,000 or $38,000 worth of sand. So that might have ended up somewhere down below. I'll have to figure out where that ended up, but it's not being represented here in this line. That's usually where it would show up there under repair and maintenance supplies in that aspect. And then repair and maintenance contract services. And so sometimes we'll have special things that we need done, like guardrail or things like that. But a lot of that stuff also ended up in our capital improvements this year. We did with the Albert project and things along those lines. And the communication, we still pay for a fax line. And so that's each year is growing less and less because we're using less of landlines and things along those lines. And then we did have some rentals. We had to rent some special equipment. So you'll see that there. I think we had a hedgehog, and then we had some other things that we had to get. So that ends up in the rental there. And then you can see the fleet rentals for my truck in that aspect. So a fleet rental, what that does is it pays for the truck, but it also covers all my service needs. So if my truck breaks down or anything, I take it into town. There's a whole shop there. And then they have Muni employees that repair everything, and it comes back, and there's no special bill. Like I had transmission issues, they had to put a new transmission in. They've done things like that, and it's just part of my annual payment that I pay to them, that aspect. And then discounts loss, it's an accounting thing, which I don't fully understand, and it gets applied, but I understand it doesn't fully go against my operating budget. So, but it does appear on here. That's actually a question I need to get clarification on from accounting department. And then contractual services. So this is what we pay to the contractor. So last year we had two different contractors working for us. One was Cooley Co., which was with us until May. Then we went out to bid and we awarded the contract to a new contractor, Western, which has been here now all winter with us and all last summer. And so we did one thing different this year is we switched up our bid time. In the past, the service area used to bid in the fall, basically right before winter. And if we had any issues with that bidding process, it just pushed us into winter without a contractor. And so what I did is I extended Cooley Co. by 6 months so we could bid in the spring. And then if we had any issues with our contractor, we at least had the spring and summer to figure it out when it wasn't so critical for them to be working. And so, so we are in a new rotation now with Western. And so overall, we spent $681,000 on standard maintenance between those two contractors, and a portion of that 681,000 was calcium chloride that was bought for application in 21. So overall, we had $18,000 left with them. There's always usually a surplus if we have a moderate to average fall, because I keep 100,000, about 110, sometimes 130,000 in reserve for October, November, and December. The deal with snowfall in that aspect. And this year we had the emergency repairs, but that didn't hit against our operating budget. That came out of our capital and our undesignated fund. And then we also had that grant for bridges and other things. And so and then we moved down to public utilities. This went down. It was actually kind of interesting. It's usually way up there, and that accounts for costs associated with this building and other things like our street lights and things like that. So we were down 20,000. I haven't had a chance to really dig into this to understand why, but if that's the case, that's good to know. We'll have to see if it happens the second year. It could have just been a fluke year, but who knows as to why. Somebody will. I'll figure it out. And then infrastructure, low value assets. This is another thing that is associated with the service area, but it doesn't directly, in the long run, hit against our operating budget. But it does show up here on our sheets. And then so our non-labor, we had a surplus of 62,927 in that aspect. And then in our contributions, we were supposed to contribute 25,000 last year. And once again, I told them to hold on to it because I didn't know what was going to happen with our expenses for the repairs at Halloween. And then we ran out of time to move it. We actually just talked about it yesterday or Friday about moving that money again, but I said, no, hold on. That money is going to end up going back into the emergency fund. So there is no money that we can move. It needs to go back and replenish that emergency fund. And then it could be discussed to move 25,000 when we build up the money to do it. But this time it's serving its purpose. So overall, in direct costs for the service area with street maintenance, we spent 1.4 million of that. You know, keep in mind 418,000 was just a pass through. It was going to our capital account from an undesignated account. So overall, we had 86,000 in surplus for last year with our expenses there. So and then here's our IGCs down below, and IGCs were pretty much right on. We only had $928,000. Excuse me, $928,000 not used for IGCs, and so overall direct cost $87,000 surplus. And then we did have some revenues, and so our revenues for the community room I put into this account. We've done that for as long as I've been here. It just gives us separation, and so we did have some rentals there and things like that. So we actually had $9,000 more than we thought we were going to have for last year. So it worked out pretty good there. Also, there's probably a one-time payment in here. We got reimbursed for an accident in 20 where somebody ran into a light pole over at Alyeska Hotel. It was a street light, a city light pole, and the insurance finally came through. So that's why we see, I think that was like $7,000 we got paid back for the repairs to that light pole. So so that came in 21. So that's why it looks bigger than it is. So overall, we had a larger surplus of $96,000 that came out of roads this year. And I think that had mostly to do with me being conservative with our spending in the last quarter because of the Halloween storm and being concerned as to where we're going to find the money to make it all pay. You know, I think the saving grace to the whole Halloween storm was that Western was very reasonable. They did great work and their pricing was very reasonable in the long run for us, especially with our term contract with them. And that expense was much less than I thought it was going to be when we got the final invoices. Okay.
I think with Western, that might be an advantage of being first year of a multi-year contract. They don't want to quite They don't want to gouge us quite yet.
Well, they've kind of set a precedent now too, and we're establishing a strong relationship. So
yeah,
it'd be hard for them to push it going forward, I hope.
Any questions on public works / road and drainage? Okay, let's move on to. Can we talk about the go back to the explanation of undesignated fund and the movement around that?
Correct.
Thank you.
So this is the fund report. As of, there's two different versions here. We get a audited fund report usually about June after the books have been completely closed out for 21, and we kind of know where the budget's going for 22, or excuse me, where it's going for the rest of the year. So in June of 21, we had met all the requirements for our bond designation and the Board of Supervisors working capital reserve. So this is basically the emergency account. So under code, we're required to have these percentages in here. And our fund balance at that point in time was 298,000. So this fund balance is undesignated. So it's not tied to anything. So it's a fund that basically is a savings account that the board can use. Well, then the Halloween storm came, and that savings account was really handy because we pulled that 298,000 out plus 120,000 from the emergency fund, and we were able to put money over. And then they had this dam and bridge grant that was area-wide money, so we were able to use some of that from the city, and so that helped us cover all our expenses as to date with the Halloween repair. So at this point in time, we're about $120,000 short in our emergency reserve, which needs to be replenished. We have no more undesignated account because we spent all that money on the Halloween storm. But with the surplus coming out of 21, that's going to help us to replenish that and also basically seed the undesignated fund and start regrowing that savings account each year with any surpluses that we have going forward. So that's where we stand at this point.
Can you remind me what the total surplus was last year across all of the funds?
Yes, I'll go to the top here.
Yeah.
So 146,000.
Right. So that's the number that there were reduced capital contributions below what we actually asked for. So if we were going to follow the policy we set at the beginning of last year, some of that would go to capital reimbursement back into capital funds, but otherwise we have more than we have something approaching the 120 that we need to replenish the emergency fund.
Correct. Yep, we're able to go back and take care of that. Which is nice because we don't require any special assessment or extra taxes paid back. So.
And just for my clarity, by code, we absolutely need the 8.25%.
Correct.
And I think the other one is by policy, isn't it, rather than by code? The 612.
Correct. And the Board of Supervisors set this policy of the 612, which I think is based on a percentage of the total undesignated fund balance that we're supposed to have.
Isn't it like about 18% of our budget or something like that? Isn't it?
Correct. I believe so. So it's based 18% of our total operating budgets. When you combine all budgets together, you get that drop down number. So. And so the 8.25%, that's our portion of paying for the bond designation for the entire city. And so that's where we get tied in every time we go out for a bond request. We get tied in with the rest of the city because we're all part of that umbrella that bond represents. So a bond rating is, the city's always trying to get the AAA bond rating. And we do that by having funds set aside, showing that we have good reserves. So.
Any questions on the fund balance? Guy, go ahead.
Yeah, Kyle, are you calling the set-asides is the same thing as emergency fund, same thing as undesignated funds?
Yeah, I would, these are the designated funds, is the 8.25% bond rating, and then the Board of Supervisors Working Capital Reserve. I refer to that also, the Board of Supervisors Working Capital Reserve, as emergency fund, because we only really tap into it when we need it for emergencies, because we've started this program of saving up in our capital accounts to do projects as they come along. So in my time being here, I've never touched that reserve except until this natural disaster.
Okay, thanks.
Do you have the balances on the capital funds?
I don't have them right now. No, I don't have them available. But I can share them with you at a later date.
I think when we do first quarter budget revisions, we should probably have that discussion.
Okay. Yep.
Brianna.
Thanks, Mike. Kyle, this might be hard to find, but maybe it was in Public Works, but the crosswalk that ended up being in 2 or 3 different payments and charges that took a while for them to pay us back or something. Is that somewhere in one of those totals?
Oh, you mean for the pedestrian flasher?
Yes.
No, all those repayments went into our capital account, so they're not caught in our operating budget. So and we're very careful about that, because that was a capital expense, and we don't want things to land in our operating budget, because then that shows that we have a large operating budget, and then our designated numbers need to go up. So we just want to make sure that whatever's in operating is operating, capital stays capital.
Okay.
But we have received all those reimbursements from the state. So the entire crosswalk pedestrian flasher was reimbursed by the state.
Okay.
Any other questions? Public or community, I should say, or supervisors or staff?
No, I think we're pretty good.
Okay.
One other thing we wanted to share with you in our packet tonight, and there's quite a bit of information here, so if you'd like to read through it and you got questions, let us know. But Margaret did put in the final program activity reports for all the different grantees in 21, and so everybody has completed this report, and so this now leads them to getting ready to get all the materials in so they can receive payments for 22. But as you can see here, you can read through these, you can see the different things associated with the report, and it gives you a summary of their activities for last year. Margaret, do you want to add anything to that?
Just we are getting ready to contract with all of our grantees, and so what happens with that is that I put their information into the template, and then I send it over to our grantees. They sign. That part usually goes pretty fast. Then sometimes collecting some of the auxiliary documents takes a little while. They have to have their insurance up to date and all the rest of that. And sometimes the window on that doesn't exactly match. But I think one of the bonuses of our new grant cycle is that it matches a little bit better for some of them. And then we'll ship it over to the Muni to process, which was quite an event last year. We went back and forth a number of times. A lot of it had to do with, people not actually working in offices and needing to get things signed, and then everything sat on a desk, and they got split up. So anyway, there's a bit of follow-up that happens then, and then hopefully within 6 weeks the checks should be cut and our grantees should have their funding. So anyway, we'll be following it up and making sure that everything runs as smoothly as we can control. And then we'll do it all again in the fall.
Yeah, was there any feedback on the timing, the different timing we used last year?
I had pretty positive feedback. I think that the earlier schedule was kind of a difficult thing for some of the grantees because it was kind of mid-summer or going into summer. And this allowed them to match up their own budget cycles with the requested information about budgets for us. So there was a little more synergy that way.
Great.
And, less waiting, but I don't know that necessarily bothers them a whole lot.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I think that is it for our summary. One other thing that we do have within the reports, and the one that we have online doesn't have this right now, but I'm just going to scroll down here real quick. Let me get past all these reports. We also have a summary report of the different departments for Parks and Rec and streets, about things that we accomplished in 21, and it includes pictures. So that's pretty cool. And it just gives a summary of different things. So it's just talking points, keeps you more aware of what we do and what we're doing out there. So that if community's asking, you can report back on different things along those lines. And we always welcome questions or concerns. We try to address them as quickly as we can in that aspect. So just all the different things that we've done over the year get represented here. So, and I'll switch real quick here. We also have the Parks and Rec one, which is and the same thing here with Parks and Rec. So, and as promised, there's pictures. So, so yeah, it's just kind of a run over of where our different things are.
Although it's not a review of last year and it's more a looking forward to next year, are there any, I know we've been talking about the very big projects, such as the Hantram Bridge, etc., and the Rowan Road. Are there any kind of smaller things that we should be aware of that you expect to see in 2022?
Well, I think one thing I'm going to try to chase these fish passages, and depends on what I can do within my operating budget. I'm very confident in Western. And so the work that we're having done right now to finish those plans will come also with a cost estimate for each culvert project. But basically, I think let me pull this up here because it's good timing. We're looking at doing the Mount Hood here, or excuse me, the Lake Tahoe culvert, which ironically, I think we spent about 4 hours on Friday trying to unplug and stop flooding the street as the water rose there. And so it was good timing to have Western there working on it, because we definitely talked a lot about the issues we have with this crossing. So that is probably the, for lack of better words, the more simple project of the other two, because we're looking at the Mount Hood crossing here, where Alyeska Creek comes through, and then also the Davos. And all three are fish passages. And like I said, we're finishing up the design work with Bill Spencer at HDR on those. So we're going to try to incorporate them. It's just a matter of what the rest of the winter does. We had a very expensive January. I think February is going to be fairly expensive because we just have had so much weather over the last 60 days. So that ends up affecting what we can do in summer. And then, I deferred a bunch of smaller projects last year, just standard drainage maintenance, some asphalt repair, because we put so much attention into the Allberg project last year, and dealing with approaches and a lot of asphalt work last year. So we will be trying to incorporate those too. Another one is Stowe. On Stowe, there's going to be that creek that we've been talking about with that land use issue. We're going to be replacing that culvert there. We have the drawings complete on that. And right now I have a request in for a bid from Western for that project. So I'm waiting for that to come back. So yeah, there's a bunch of back to sort of the smaller maintenance that we have done while trying to maybe do one or two of these larger projects.
I also noticed a comment in the report about just the number of grant opportunities which are coming next year in terms of the Infrastructure Act. So, and there was some comment about potentially getting a fundraiser or grant writer.
Correct. We've been looking at that, and we've been given a couple names, and yeah, we'll be doing that, especially like the AARP grants, and then the infrastructure grants. I'm actually attending a seminar through the Municipal League this week on the infrastructure grants and how to write for those. So we're trying to figure that out, because we definitely have to push the municipality on our behalf to make sure we get those grant opportunities and funding opportunities considered. And so trying to understand that whole process going forward.
And one of the differences is there's a lot of support for transportation projects through AMATs, which we are, of course, not within. So there's almost no support from the Muni for anything which is outside of the AMATs area that's transportation related. Now, a lot of what we want isn't about transportation per se, it's about drainage and other things, but it's just it does make, and roads. Well, yeah, but more on the maintenance side than anything capital, so it's a little difficult. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, we'll move on to item number 2 on our agenda, which is agenda item LUC 2202-5, go to Parks and Recreation and Girdwood Turnigan Arms Lions Club request for GBOS resolution of support, etc. And this is kind of a weird timing issue where we need to get it in, where we need to make a decision before our next GBOS meeting, although it hasn't gone through land use yet.
Correct. The way the application works on this, we can't get it back to you before the application date and your regular meeting. So we've done this in the past where we've sought approval from GBOS that is dependent on approval from land use. So we will be presenting this at land use this month. And basically, once again, we are seeking support from GBOS for us writing a grant to build a pavilion over at Lions Club Park, and pursue a wish or a desire that the Lions Club has had. And they will be partners in this. They will help us fundraiser for it. They'll probably be involved with helping us build it, and proactive in that. So I meet with them this week, and they will at land use as well. They were out at your last GBOS meeting to express their support.
I'm going to ask the same question. Oh, Brianna, please go ahead.
Oh, I don't have a question. I was just going to move to approve.
I'm just going to ask the question: if we're making a commitment to financial contribution to match, but no sense of what that is in terms of scale.
No.
So can we? I mean, in terms of matching, are we talking 10%, 50%, and then roughly what?
I would say we're probably saying at this point in time 50% match to this, and it just depends. The other thing that we are also hoping for, and we've got word from the state, is that the Land Water Conservation Grant comes out. So with the Parks Foundation, you get a 2-year grant cycle. So we will probably most likely not do any construction in 22, which will give us time to get our designs fully complete and then move to construction in 23. And we're hoping this fall, what we've heard directly from one of the park supervisors, the superintendents, is that the Land and Water Conservation Grant's coming out, and that's a prime grant for a project like this. So if we can combine those together, yeah, it will hopefully help us reduce what we need from our capital fund to make it happen.
Okay. Although it's not directly relevant to this item, while it's in my mind, there's also a we're likely to see a state transportation alternatives grant program this year. I think that's expected in kind of the late summer. So that's does apply to trails and multi-use.
Yes.
So potentially there's options there.
Yep.
Okay, sorry, Brianna, go ahead.
I could read the motion into the record as a motion, or void reading, or whatever.
If you want to read it, that's fine.
Okay. Resolution 2022-XX of the Girdwood Board of Supervisors, a resolution in support of Girdwood Valley Service Area, GVSA, Parks and Recreation, Girdwood Turnagain Arm Lions Club application for an Anchorage Park Foundation grant. Whereas the Girdwood Turnagain Arm Lions Club has been an active community service group in Girdwood for over 25 years, facilitating, managing, and participating in a variety of projects, including school end of year celebrations, Girdwood Volunteer Fire Department community event, Lions Club Eyeglass Recycling Program, Girdwood Cleanup, and the annual Humpy Fest event, local scholarships for high school graduates, vision screening for school-age kids, and many other events within the community. And whereas GBOS Resolution 2015-06, support of dedication of the Girdwood Lions Park, led to formal dedication by the municipality of Anchorage. And whereas Girdwood Turnagain Arm Lions Club has expressed interest for many years in improving the park by adding a picnic pavilion meeting accessibility requirements in order to provide a comfortable shelter for community members to enjoy. And whereas the Anchorage Park Foundation Challenge Grant creates a partnership possibility to match GVSA and Girdwood Turnagain Arm Lions Club funds by promoting local participation in this park improvement. And whereas the Girdwood Turnagain Arm Lions Club is committed to assisting with meeting the grant match requirements through fundraising efforts and in-kind donations. And whereas the Girdwood Land Use Committee voted XX in favor, XX opposed at their March 14th, 2022 meeting to recommend this resolution of support to be included in the Anchorage Park Foundation grant application. Therefore, the Girdwood Board of Supervisors supports the GVSA and Girdwood Turnagain Arm Lions Club application for the Anchorage Park Foundation 2022 Challenge Grant and commits to financial contribution to matching the grant through GVSA Parks and Recreation Capital Savings Account, passed by a vote of X to this day, 28th day of February 2022, contingent upon recommendation by the Girdwood Land Use Committee at their March regular meeting.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second. This is Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, any discussion? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, so again, I think this is something we've discussed, and I feel there's general support for this. So, can you do a roll call vote, please, Kyle?
Mike Edgington,
Yes.
Brianna Sullivan,
Yes.
Amanda Sassy,
Yes.
Jennifer Wingard,
Yes.
Guy Wade.
Yes.
A motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. So we will now move on to item number 3, agenda item LUC 2201-07, discussion of Assembly redistricting, reapportionment of Assembly seats, and consider GVSA formal comment. Could you go to the online map viewer?
Yeah, it's just
Kyle?
slow. Here we go.
So I'll make a couple of comments first. So general context, there were lots of maps presented, lots of maps have been discussed. As of now, I believe today, there are 4 maps which are in discussion, 4 draft maps. Hopefully we can look at these online. There we go. One of the initial maps that was proposed had Girdwood and Eagle River tied together. Nobody liked that. Nobody in Eagle River liked it. Nobody at Turnagain Arm liked it. Nobody really around Anchorage liked it. So that wasn't under serious discussion. That's gone away. But there are 4 maps, some of which have some similar, one of which has a somewhat similar problem. But we typically don't make formal comments on these sorts of things. We tend to be very focused just on Girdwood. And one can argue whether we should or shouldn't be focused just on Girdwood. But in this particular case, a lot of what we do is very dependent on who our assembly members are. There's not much we can do formally without the support of our local assembly members. So what area they represent, and they're unlikely to come from Girdwood, they're most likely to come from an area of South Anchorage. So which parts of South Anchorage they represent is of great importance to us as a community. And therefore, I think that the borders and the boundaries of the districts, which we're going to be using for the next decade at least, and possibly 2 decades or longer, matter a lot. So that's why I think it's something we should have an opinion on and express that opinion. Many other community councils are even more impacted than we are. Some of the proposals have community councils split into different districts, etc. But I think it still has a very significant impact on us. So I hope everyone's had the opportunity to look at these 4 maps. Has anyone, after studying them, has anyone got any thoughts or comments or anything they want to say? Because if not, I have some more thoughts on the specific instances, but I'd like to hear from everyone else. Guy, please go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick. I think John Weddle sent out an email and or some information on those, and I think Brianna forwarded it to us. You provided a little breakdown on them. Can you? I didn't see map 12 in there. I've looked at map 11, 7, and 6. Do you have a short summary of 12?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a comment. I've thought on 12, and my thought really is that it's got the largest difference in the sort of big. There's 2 really noticeably small districts and 2 very big districts, and then some others which are in the middle. So there's a much more uneven population distribution than any of the other maps. And you know, I mean, in principle, you know, District 6 always has the highest number of voters for. It's always, or I don't know always, but at least over the last couple of decades, it's traditionally had more people vote from District 6 than others. Probably because it's got a more stable population. There are more homeowners there. So the number of people in each district doesn't necessarily represent how many voters they're going to be, but the closer we get to an even distribution across the districts, I think generally the better. And this one seems to be very uneven. You see there's some with 1,500, 2 districts with 1,500 fewer people, i.e. an overrepresentation, and other districts with approaching 1,400 too many. Brianna.
Thanks, Mike. I watched the public hearing on the 24th last Thursday, which ended really quickly to the surprise of the assembly because they thought it'd be long and they'd have to add an extra hearing. And there was still a little bit of comment to extend, but and I, of course, didn't read the hundreds of emails that they received, but the general consensus I heard was support for map 11, and then map 7 people are speaking up against because it puts Eagle River Chugiak, which is District 2, with part of the east part of the hillside. And so if we came up with a formal statement to honor the request of people in Eagle River that don't want to be part of the hillside, I'd feel better supporting 6 or 7. I'm sorry, 6 or 11. And that Weddleton did a good job on map 11, keeping the neighborhoods identified and intact. And that there just wasn't a lot of feedback on that public hearing on the 27th. So I thought that was a good sign.
I think that one of the comments, a lot of community councils haven't had a chance to really discuss this in detail yet. So one of the reasons there wasn't as much feedback is lots of community councils are still considering it, and they're probably going to provide feedback either tomorrow's meeting or even the one following.
Right, March 1st is what I was trying to replay
March
that
1st.
meeting. Okay.
March 1st is when the next public hearing is, which is
Mhm.
tomorrow, assembly meeting. Guy.
Yeah, did, do we know why I guess it's called Whittleton map, but map 11 goes further south, encompasses all the way down to Clout Road? That was the only thing I noticed, a big difference, one of the differences besides Independent Park. Between map 11, is that just a population move, so they're more even? Does anybody know why that is going to be? It wasn't part of that park district, but now it will be. Has anybody heard why that goes so far south?
Yeah, my understanding is it is about population, so it maintains pretty much the current boundary along Diamond and Abbott, and then Bayshore gets pushed into West Anchorage. So what happened with all of the maps, because the big change is that District 1, the downtown district, has to get bigger because it used to be half the size of the others, now it's the full size. So that gets bigger and sort of pushes the other districts immediately around it sort of out a bit, and that tends to just have, that mostly has an effect around downtown, but then you get these spillover effects down here. So in order to maintain the population, in order to maintain the boundary along kind of the northern side, it pushes the area around Campbell Lake into the west, because there is this weird thing of the south. The south side of Campbell Lake has always been in District 6, which is, I kind of think, much more like West Anchorage than it is South Anchorage.
Thanks.
So you actually, Kyle, if you compare 11 and 6, that's probably quite a good comparison, because I think 6 follows very closely to the old boundary, except that one Independence Park section, which gets pushed into midterm. Jennifer, please go ahead.
Oops. Sorry. Thanks, Mike. I feel like we kind of, or maybe I need more clarification on exactly why we're weighing in on this. I understand that it is important and impactful to Girdwood, but I'm not clear if it's really our province, and particularly I'm not clear that we're not wading into a political realm that is not necessarily our business. So could we have a little more discussion about that?
Brianna.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that. My first thought would be that other community councils are weighing in. So we're rather large and probably prefer to be with South Anchorage, and this doesn't happen often. So 10 years is the census, and then they're adding a 12th seat to the assembly, which is a pretty big deal. But yeah, that's all. I know it's political to part of it, but it doesn't matter who our representative ends up being. We still have the same amount of representatives.
So I'll speak to this as well. I think.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jennifer.
I do want to hear what you have to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we look at, there's a couple of things here. One is, if you look at the population numbers for District 6, there's a big difference in. So if you just think about it in terms of, there's 2 assembly members that represent District 6, and there's quite a big difference in how many people are in different District 6 across the different maps. So just simply from a population point of view, there's quite a big swing between the one which has the largest number of people in, i.e. the most dilution, and the smallest number of people, so the least dilution. So, you know, how much our vote counts varies quite a bit across the different maps. So just simply from a numerical point of view, it matters. And then the other thing is, you know, I think obviously if there was one map that pushed us into Eagle River or something across the mountains, then I think we would have a very, very big comment on that. One of the maps does exactly the same thing with South Anchorage. So if we have a strong opinion on Turning and Arm being included in with Eagle River, then I think if we were going to be consistent and not too narrow, not too parochial, we could probably express a similar concern with other communities. So I think it's, you know, part of it is being a good citizen of the municipality and not just simply, you know, having a very myopic view on only things that happen within this valley. A lot of other bodies and community councils try and address, you know, try and be good citizens of the municipality as a whole and have opinions on things which don't necessarily only affect them. And I think historically, Girdwood's been a little bit more myopic than many of the other community councils and other parts of the municipality, which is, you know, understandable because we're geographically separate, and there isn't quite the same kind of spillover between neighbours between us and, you know, say South Anchorage, because there's a mountain range in the middle. So it's partly that it does have direct impact on us, both in terms of the numbers and where our representatives are likely to come from, and then it's also really the sort of good citizen argument. Guy.
Yeah, I was just curious what it says consider our formal comment. Is that, what's that look like? Are you talking about a resolution or speaking up publicly on this, or what exactly are we, is our plan of action?
I would imagine a resolution, which can be brief.
And in the resolution, would we all kind of consider just one of these plans? And when would that be? That they're down to 3 or 4 now, is that correct?
Down to these 4. So there is a public hearing scheduled for tomorrow. There is likely to be another public hearing on the 15th. So we can submit the resolution in either case. And obviously as individuals, we can also do that, either at the meetings or submit comments through the Anchorage Reapportionment website. But the idea of, I think the reason we're discussing tonight is at least it gives us the options of having something in writing that can be submitted for tomorrow's meeting, in case they don't go any further. But I think it's very likely there'll be another hearing on the 15th. But that's still before our next UBOS meeting.
Yep. Okay.
Jennifer, you did have your hand up, but put it down again if you want to. Do you have any comments?
Not just yet. I want to see how the discussion progresses.
Brianna.
Thanks, Mike. Guy, I was just going, or well, anyone, but Guy's question about what would it look like. I think I saw one in the attachment or the packet to one of the meetings, and it was one sentence from a committee, but ours could be a resolution that's also, like Mike said, very brief.
Actually, Kyle, could you just loop through the all 4 maps, and if we could just take a look at the count on the District 6. So on the first one, there's a slight overpopulation of about 150, so a very slight dilution. The next one is an population of about 500, and then I think there's an overpopulation on, 400 in the other direction on map 11, and then 800 on map 12. So there's quite a big range there between the largest and the smallest. And I think we could definitely argue that it would be an easy case to make that we would rather have a smaller population than a bigger population in District 6 and have less dilution in our voting, in our representation, for example.
So that would be map 11 would be the.
Well, in terms of representation, I think, is it 6 or 7 is the best? Yeah, 6 is pretty good and 7's even better. Yeah, we're overrepresented in map 6 and we're only slightly less than average on map. Sorry, we're overrepresented on map 7 and we're only slightly underrepresented in map 6. Whereas 10 and 11 and 12 are much worse. 12 is by far the worst, but 11 also has an overpopulation in this district. So that's one axis in which I think we can, just from a very selfish Girdwood point of view, we can argue there is a difference between the maps, and one that would benefit 7, then 6, then 11, then 12. And then I think the other thing is I would argue the other thing we should consider is definitely we would have argued very strongly against Turning Arm being included with Eagle River, because we're literally opposite ends of the municipality, and the only way we can be considered contiguous or connected is via mountain range. And the same argument applies in this map between the area in the eastern end of the hillside and Eagle River. You have to go through 3 other districts, or at least 2 other districts, to go from one to the other, unless you're going across the mountains where there are few paths. So it's really, if you didn't color in the sections of the map that have no population and no road connection, then you would have this separate island of the hillside, completely independent of the rest of Eagle River, Chugiak, and Jaber. So again, just on the principle of we would have very strongly disagreed with any map that put Turning Arm and Eagle River. We could definitely make the same argument for hillside and Eagle River, Chugiak, because they're not contiguous in any meaningful sense of the word.
Right. I'm not raising my hand. Thank you for bringing up that visual. That's helpful. And I think it helps people like Eagle River that do not feel part of those places across the mountains. And the goal of a lot of the map makers was to be contiguous and neighborhood conscious. So, and then therefore their representatives would be from their area. So someone from Eagle River wouldn't represent us. And if the will of the body tonight is not exactly certain, could we support 2 maps or choose one?
I think we could do any of those.
So I think map 11 and 6, because when there were only 3 options, they're pretty simple to choose 2 that stand out, but I'm still liking both of them, 6 and 11.
Do you want to make that as a motion?
Almost. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, just before you make a motion, I don't know enough about it to choose between the 2, the 6 and the 11. What that means for us as far as bringing down to Clatt Road, just those little changes.
Okay, thanks, Guy. Well, I move that we formally support map 11 and 6, and then the assembly to do their role next.
Is there a second?
Sure, I'll second that.
I'll second that.
Okay, I think Guy got in slightly faster. Okay, do we want to, so we can just make it a straight statement, or we can make we can express a reason why we do that. And I definitely have I think I've already expressed a reason why I think 6 and 11 are definitely better than 7 and 12. For reasons of both population distribution and 7 being uncontiguous.
I think including those reasons would be beneficial.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Kyle, can you do the honors?
Sure. Mike Edgington,
Yes.
Brianna Sullivan,
Yes.
Amanda Sassy. Sorry, Amanda, I didn't hear you there.
Yes.
Thank you. Jennifer Wingard,
No.
Guy Wade.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-1.
Okay, so in terms of the mechanics of this, does staff feel they have enough information to draft something tomorrow morning, or do you need more?
Margaret, how do you feel?
I'd love to receive a couple sentences to add some more language to, and then I can send it to you to review.
Okay, so this would be probably Brianna and I should co-sign.
Sounds good.
And we'll say exactly what we said tonight, or as close as I can remember. Guy.
Yeah, sometimes like on these resolutions that we vote on but we haven't read, will we be given the opportunity to review it before it goes forward? Just because we're, as a board, putting our name to it. I'm not saying that it would just be nice to, and don't wait on us, but just a chance to send it out to the group. Is that something we could do?
Margaret, it sounds reasonable to me. Is that okay mechanically, Margaret?
I have no issue with sending it out to you. What you might not know, Guy, is that the supervisor who is on the signature line usually has seen the resolution and has had an opportunity to edit it. So while the rest of you might not have seen them, they've been viewed by the supervisor who's presenting them technically. So yeah, absolutely. In this case, nobody has seen it because it hasn't been written yet. So absolutely, I think we can share that.
I maybe add the caveat, I mean, this is going to be submitted that, whether we see the email or not, or have comments, don't create a bottleneck through this, but an opportunity would be nice.
Right. Well, I typically don't email all of the supervisors at one time seeking any kind of comment, because that starts to be a little bit sticky.
If you do have comment, you can reply directly to staff, and then we'll decide how to address it. If we're hearing individual comments coming back, and so if you write back, just reply to Margaret and I, and if we see an issue, then we may call that, oh, you guys need to address this in a special meeting.
What we're going to, at least what I'm going to do, is try and make sure that we use the language we've used this evening, previous to the motion. So we just write down what's been said tonight.
Yeah, no, I agree with that totally. And like I say, I don't want to create a bottleneck. It seems like on other resolutions, we will, and I'm not suggesting I would want to wordsmith this at all, but sometimes on other resolutions, we do comment on how it's written. So,
yeah. Yeah, I think it's typically letters where we say, you know, follow these principles, but we don't vote on the wording of the letter. We vote on the content of the principle of the letter or content.
Yep, for sure.
Okay, any more comments, thoughts on this? If not, we will move to the public comment period. Okay, public comment. Persons offering public comment must state the full name and address. Public comments limited 3 minutes per person. Must be on subjects not listed on the agenda. Does anyone like to make a public comment? Supervisors in their public capacity, or members of the public, or staff, or anybody? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, so give it another couple of seconds. Nothing there. So let's move on to adjournment and entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn. This is Brianna.
Thank you. Any objection? Not hearing any. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Have a great